We wanted to spend just a couple minutes this morning thanking, first of all of you for being here, for being engaged this entire time, for being part of a conversation in this format. And I appreciate so much your involvement and commitment. We also wanted to acknowledge our sponsors, for whom, if without these people, it would have been difficult to sort of pull this off. First, our three convening sponsors, the Lausanne Social Venture Fund. That's the one I'm actually in charge of, so that's my money. The Ion Management Science Lab of Coney are now joint venture partners, and we're so excited about that. And then Strategy Science, who is, of course, providing the outlet for the academic aspects of this effort. I want to acknowledge both the Office of the President of the University of Utah. It happens that the President of the University of Utah is the former Dean of the Business School. So Taylor was instrumental in hiring me. And so when I came to Taylor's office, he was very generous, understood the value here. And the dean's office, we have a new dean, so this is actually the old interim dean who is our financial backstop. And the new dean, well, he doesn't have a choice. He has to be that too. So he's actually also very supportive. Also, we have a variety of centers in the college I wanted to mention. We have the Goff Strategic Leadership Center. That's the center that Todd is the academic director of, and their staff is here, have been very helpful. NYU Stern, thank you. That's a wonderful donation to help us there. The Center for Business, Health, and Prosperity. That's a group on campus that I was associated with, help founding, that focuses on building economic prosperity and health in developing economies primarily. The Sorensen Impact Institute, Matt Higgins is here someplace. He's the academic director of that. That's an organization that supports research and practice on innovation. The Mariner S. Eccles Institute for Quantitative and Market Analysis, QAMO, that's our sister department in the college, Entrepreneurship Strategy. And then the Center for Innovative, that's the Sorensen Institute for Innovativeness. That's also an organization on campus. Finally, Rotman School, Toronto. Where's Anita? Thank you, Anita. There you go. Thank you. And Said Business School, Oxford. I appreciate those as well. So, as you can see, this is a team effort. A lot of people involved that made all this possible, and we're grateful for all their work. Yes, thank you. Very good. Also, I just want you to know that you will be receiving shortly, it'll come out in email today, an evaluation form. We love your feedback about the location, the format, the content, your willingness to, thank you, your willingness to contribute to strategy, science, special issues in the book, and those kinds of things. If you could get that back to us, we'd appreciate it, because it's going to help us with the powers that be. So we have to be able to do those things as well. Thank you. As you know, just remind you, we are looking to continue these conversations in written form. And again, to remind you of the strategy, science, special issues. This information will also go out to you. Really deeply consider thinking about writing papers for those special issues, and or the book that Todd and I will be writing and editing over the next year and a half or so. We will be getting your input into both of those activities. So I'm looking forward to that as well. So thanks for all of you for being here and for all that sort of stuff we had to talk about, but it's very important. But I don't want to take away any more time from this great panel, so go for it. Thanks, guys.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Let me first extend my gratitude to Todd and Jay for putting this together. I think this has been a wonderful experience, and I think really important for the field to have these conversations. I also want to thank Todd and Jay for giving us the 7:30 a.m. on the last day slot, because it shows that those of you who are in the room right now, you are dedicated, you think this is an important topic, and so thank you all for being here with us. When I was asked to have this assignment and to put together a panel, Jay and Todd said it would be a good idea to have some more senior scholars and some rising stars, younger stars here. So I'm joined by Vanessa, Olga, and Veet. I'll let you decide which of us are the old people and which of us are the young people on this panel. But it's been a real joy to work with my colleagues here as we've thought about this session. Like many of the other panels, we didn't follow the instructions. We decided that we were not all going to write an individual paper, and we've decided to write one paper together as a team. Unlike some of the other groups, that's still aspirational, so there is not a paper shared from us because we did not write one, but we did work to coordinate on this presentation here at this panel. We also decided to mix it up a little bit. Instead of doing a series of presentations or share the PowerPoint deck here, we're actually going to run this fireside chat style here. So let me advance here. What we're going to do here is we're going to take the main prompt that we have and break it down into 3 separate questions here. And for each question, I'm going to just share some broad thoughts here and then make an assertion and then get reflections from the panelists on that assertion. The last point here that we're going to open up discussion after each question, we're not going to do that. I realized that was a bad idea. So we're going to go through the 3 questions and then open it up to the group here, though we are going to try to leave at least 40 minutes or so to have that conversation. So the 3 sub-questions we want to ask are, first, has strategic management had much to say to date about these grand challenges? The second is really more of a normative question here. Should grand challenges be in the purview of strategic management? And then the third, maybe a more prescriptive question, how can strategic management maybe have more to say about these grand challenges? So before we jump in, I just want to make a couple large observations here. First, this idea of grand challenges is receiving significant global attention and scholarship. People follow the UN sustainability goals. This idea that there are a number of society, system-level challenges that we face as a global community, whether it's sustainability and climate change, poverty and income inequality, human rights, social justice, global health and pandemic, especially after COVID, being important topics. And really there is a prescription here, right? Like, how do we advance society on these grand challenges? And I would just observe to start off with here is there is a vast literature coming across the sciences, social sciences, engineering, attempting to address these challenges. So this is a big topic that touches upon a lot of different academic areas, and there's a lot of work being dedicated to thinking about how we make progress on these issues. The second thing I would observe is that managers are paying attention and responding to these grand challenges. Now, we can debate whether this is all cheap talk or whether they should be doing this or not, but as a matter of fact, they are doing things, right? We are seeing efforts migrating to the C-suite. We see the appointment of things like chief sustainability officers. We see the publishing of annual reports about their ESG performance. They're setting goals. They're discussing impact. They're working with different groups within kind of their broader stakeholder set here. And of course, especially over the last few years, we've seen this concerted effort in the investment community to think about investing in firms around ESG principles and the like. And again, these things can be contested and there's a lot of debate around them, but as a matter of fact, these things are phenomenon that are happening in the world. So, first question, has strategic management had much to say to date about ground challenges? As someone who started work around business and environment issues back in the mid-90s, I'm actually amazed to see the vast growth in the strategy literature on topics related to these kind of bigger questions about kind of social impact and the like. They come from a number of different traditions. Some of us come from a more sustainability tradition. As we talked about 2 days ago, there's a whole stakeholder strategy effort that really goes back 40 years or so. Some of us are also part of the non-market strategy community here. And I would argue we're asking important questions that at least touch upon this idea of grand challenges. Under what conditions do firms internalize negative externalities? A lot of work recently about what is material to firms in this ESG space. Again, the whole stakeholder literature. When are stakeholders important? When do they influence firms? There's a whole literature on disclosure. When do firms disclose various performance attributes and the like, and why do they do so? A lot of work on, again, community building, collective action. When do firms coordinate with various stakeholders and the like? And then some deeper philosophical issues, which I'm sure will be part of our discussion today, about organizational purpose and what is the role of businesses in society. So our first assertion is, while there is this vast literature that has developed and strategic management has had something to say, it is maybe not enough if, again, your premise is how do we make progress on these grand challenges? And again, I just point out there's a lot of work across a lot of different academic disciplines trying to address those grand challenges. So I'm not going to run through these bullet points here because we kind of collectively crafted these. And instead, this is the point I'm going to turn to our panelists here to get their reflection. And I guess the first question would be, do you support this assertion? And what are your thoughts? So I'm going to go with Veet first here.
I guess we're starting to reveal who's the senior, who can go back furthest in time. So 30 years ago, when I was starting the PhD program, it's kind of scary. I think it's the first time I could say that. 30 years ago, when I was starting the PhD program, the question about whether you could study multinational firms' interactions with political actors, addressing inequality and inequity in the distribution of electricity or in infrastructure services in emerging markets, whether you could do that in a business school, in a management department, was an open question. Some people are like, well, you should be maybe getting a PhD in nonprofit management, or we're not really, that's not really a question that we study. And things have changed pretty dramatically. I mean, when I look around this room, when I listen to the conversation on the first day talking about social value, stakeholder theory, it's really impressive how much questions that used to be sort of delegated to philanthropy have become stakeholder strategy, have become strategy even, have become integrated. On the other hand, we were scheduled at 7:30 in the morning on the last day of the conference, and I'm still in an academy session at 3:30 on Tuesday talking about these issues, in which one of the presentations is on Zoom, and one of the presentations was canceled because somebody has a flight. So there's room for progress. I mean, look, you can look at this a lot of ways. Companies are making material investments. Percentage points of revenue, percentage points of profit in voluntary efforts to address climate mitigation, to address social justice, to address racial justice. Big investment banks are allocating funds to strategies for the climate transition, for gender empowerment. And so there are vehicles that are attracting trillions of dollars of capital. Alliances are being formed between companies and NGOs to make progress on these things, and many of us in the room are studying those alliances. There are growing arguments that the way we accept that intangibles are important, but we're starting to recognize that part of the key value of intangibles isn't just brand and R&D, it's also relational capital with communities and with stakeholders. So that's all progress. But none of this is lining up with a net zero goal. None of this is coming close to mobilizing $150 trillion of capital, which is going to be required to get to a net zero goal. None of this is coming close to addressing social injustice, either in the United States with historic discrimination or against immigrant communities in Europe, racial identity groups across Africa. Businesses arguably are often making identity group conflict worse rather than better through their investments, which is destabilizing support for capitalism, contributing to the rise of populism, threatening the post-war economic order. How are we doing on the SDGs? I mean, so if we're really serious about our firms contributing to addressing the grand challenges, that's not as much an open question. We're addressing the topics of the grand challenges, but we're doing it from a firm-centered standpoint. So yeah, I wholeheartedly agree.
Great, thank you. Let me go with Olga, since you're on the end there.
So thank you. Thank you for inviting us all here. I don't want to repeat everybody, but it's been great. And it's great to be here at 7:30 a.m. in the morning. So for those who don't know me, I've been teaching sustainability strategy to MBA students for now almost 10 years. So a lot of my comments will be coming from that experience. And I just want to share one data point. In the last 2 years, so it's a strategy course. It's part of core now, actually, a core elective still, but it's a core class. But what I've noticed, so they have this final project that they have to do, and of course, as any strategy final project, it's like a consulting project. They have to find a leader and a laggard in sustainability in one industry. And what I've noticed in the last 2 years or so, it's really hard to find a laggard. So this shows you the progress. And of course, they pick public firms, those that publish the reports, and they can collect information. But that also shows you how far has business advanced in addressing these challenges. Moreover, when they pick two companies, it's very hard for them to now pick a leader too, because they cover different areas. There's a lot more competition and which issues they go after, what solutions they provide. And so I just wanted to share that experience with you. The other class I teach is a global immersion elective, and so we actually with sustainability and social enterprise theme, and so we travel with 25 MBA students around the world, visiting companies that do this kind of work. So literally seeing in practice how different companies address these grand challenges. And in terms of research, now let's go back to the actual question. Well, no, actually, let me share one story. So when we were in Zimbabwe last May, we visited this one startup, and you would appreciate it, 3 young white Zimbabweans who traveled the world, came back home to address a grand challenge, and the challenge that they picked was very personal to them. So one of the founders of the startup, it's called LA Collection, his dad was attacked by an elephant out of the blue. This is Africa, like there comes an elephant, and of course it's very dangerous. But why is this happening? Because of plastic pollution. So elephants go to, the waste dumps, eat whatever they can find. And so there are also, as you have images of birds with their stomachs open and a lot of plastic inside, so you have the same images now, viral images of elephants. And so as they consume this plastic waste, the toxins affect their body, they become crazy, and then they attack human beings. And so this human-animal-wild conflict is a grand challenge. But the solution that they found is very innovative, right? So what they did, they adopted this new technology. So one of them was in the construction industry. The other one was an MBA student who had, the toolkit that maybe some of you even taught him. And then the third one had the connection to this innovative technology. But so what they do, they actually hire women, which is also addressing another grand challenge, who are living in poverty, don't have opportunities, who walk around and collect this plastic waste for them, bring it to a site where they actually make concrete mixed with this plastic waste material that's much stronger to build with and withstands, any sort of challenges that they have on the ground. And so it's addressing several problems, which kind of demonstrates to you grand challenges are complex, multi-level, they require innovative solutions that essentially require public actors, private actors, society to get on board. Sorry. And so this is like just another example, I guess, from practice. But now back to research that has strategic management had enough to say. I do think that, there is, again, looking, yes, in this room, looking at our work, people's work in this room, there has been a lot of progress. But given that, I coordinated a special issue on grand challenges and responsible innovation in JMS, I know Rajri has a special issue in SMJ on sort of, say, similar topics, right, innovative solutions to these challenges. That points to me that there is not enough, right, that we still want, and because there's a special issue, there's still a special call to address them. So I do agree with this statement.
Vanessa?
Thanks. Thanks so much to the organizers, Todd, Jay, for having us. This has been really fantastic. I want to say, so I agree, with Olga, there's been this increasing demand, I think, for these types of topics from our stakeholders, if you think about it. There's been a surge in just interest from the MBA students, executives, on these types of issues. And I also agree with Veet in this characterization of sort of this having evolved in my slightly shorter career than Veet's, having seen an evolution in terms of sort of the acceptance and interest in these types of topics. But I would really characterize the existing strategic management research as sort of adjacent to, as opposed to really saying something about these issues. And, the reason for that, I think, is that a lot of our research on, say, corporate social responsibility, for example, has been existing under this premise of we need to figure out whether or not this can be win-win. Can firms do well by doing good? What are the conditions under which firms can be more financially successful, whether it be via employee motivation or other stakeholder behavior, if they engage in these types of activities that may also do something about the grand challenges in sort of an indirect way. But I think there's two sort of aspects of this doing well by doing good kind of emphasis that have limited what we've really been able to say so far. One part of it has to do with the doing well aspect. I would argue that to really make progress on some of these grand challenges, it is probably going to be necessary for firms and individuals to sort of be willing to do things that are kind of against what their immediate short-term self-interest might look like. And so when we're framing these things as sort of under what conditions can we do well, I think we're bounding a little bit what we can say there. The other aspect is this doing good part of the phrase, doing well by doing good. I would argue that most of the CSR research or most of the research in strategy journals that has invoked that phrase has not actually looked at whether any of these programs actually do good. My own research included. We take assume or take for granted that maybe these corporate philanthropy programs or other types of initiatives that we're examining whether they influence firm performance, we take for granted that they're doing good. When in fact, there's research out there, maybe in other fields, that suggests that sometimes there can be unintended consequences of these types of things. So what if these programs actually have zero impact on society, or maybe even negative impact on society? And I think we haven't gone there yet. And so I would personally characterize the research that we are seeing. It's exciting to see kind of this increase in engagement on these topics, but I would characterize our research so far as sort of adjacent to, but not really addressing directly the grand challenges.
Can I add something? I just remembered looking at Alfonso. I still remember when you told me about 6 years ago how you were decomposing SMJ submissions, and a third of them already at that time was on CSR and these kinds of topics. Just again to put it into perspective.
So that goes to my next question, and be provocative. Is this a good thing? Is this a good thing that all of this work has now proliferated in the strategy world? And so this question, should grand challenges be in the purview of strategic management? And let me just try to frame the counter for why this maybe shouldn't be something we should be focused on here. There are, of course, these classic assertions that we all know very well, that the firm purpose should be to limited pursuit of stakeholder value maximization. And this, of course, is often attributed to Milton Friedman, but others have obviously made this argument over the years. To be clear, this is a normative argument that he was making. It was an argument he was making in the 1960s when there were a number of firms originally thinking about pursuing corporate social responsibility. And he was making the argument firms should actually, for the best of society, have this limited purview of pursuit of shareholder value. I would also observe there were two very important conditionals on that again, sometimes are lost through history here. One was that the companies should obey the rule of law. Like that is required of them. You can't pursue profit if you're going to violate the law. And there's an assumption there about exogeneity of institutions. So for those of us who are in the non-market world, we know that's not true, right? That companies are actively shaping their institutional environment. They're actively influencing the political process. They're lobbying. They're trying to set regulation and rules. And so the normative argument starts to fall apart when we endogenize institutions. The second piece is about endogeneity of preferences, which is something I don't think we talk enough about in economics and in strategy, which is there's a presumption here that we have utility and firms are responding to consumer and other stakeholder utility. But let's be honest, companies are actively shaping our utility function. They're spending lots of money at Google to try to nudge you and have certain preferences and the like. How does that change the whole equation when this occurs? I would observe there also have been some recent critiques of all of this, efforts by companies and the like, in the research as well, that largely frames this as agency issues. And I think that's a really interesting and important question. When we see companies going out and pursuing social objectives, is this really just an agency issue where they're imposing their political and moral beliefs in ways that maybe don't satisfy other stakeholders, especially their shareholders? Or are there some power dynamics within the organization, like middle managers and the like, who are asserting influence in ways that are actually destructive to firm value creation? And then the last point is just one that we've talked quite a bit about over the last few days, which is, what are the bounds of our field? And I would argue that, if you take a very traditional, narrow view of strategic management as exclusively concerned with the securing of supernormal profits, maybe then you would argue that there's not a lot of us, not much interesting that we can say in strategy about ground challenges, and we should therefore ignore it. So I'm going to give you a shocking assertion here, given our panel. We think it should absolutely be in the purview of strategic management. So I know that is going to be shocking here. But with that, let me go back to the panel. And Vanessa, I'm going to go with you first here. So do you agree with this assertion? And if so, why should this be an important part of our work?
So yes, but with nuance. Yes, with a caveat. You know, I think there's aspects of our field that make us well poised potentially to say something about these issues. And I mean, I personally care about these issues and would love to be doing research that I feel like has something to say about and moves the needle on these types of things. But there's sort of just two caveats or kind of cautions that I want to bring up when I think about I myself potentially doing more of this and maybe others doing more of this as well. And one is something that came up earlier in the conference, which is the fact that, you know, in the realm of grand challenges, we are talking about issues that that societies do not agree on in a lot of ways. And so, you know, not only do they not agree on some of these issues, there are groups of people who have sort of polarized, completely opposite opinions on what the problems are and what the appropriate solutions are to those problems. And to make it even more complicated, you know, these are sets of issues about which polarization of opinion has been shifting over time. You know, there was a time, I think maybe many years ago, where nobody really would have thought of climate change issues as sort of being politicized. Nowadays, they are very politicized. Same with sort of DEI issues. And so we're seeing sort of a shift in opinion over time about these opinions as well. And I think that's sort of very different, I think, from when you think about our current focus in strategic management as when we think about helping managers address their problems and challenges. Because generally speaking, you know, better firm performance, good. More motivated employees, good. So there's been generally more agreement on the types of problems and challenges that we've sort of been trying to help managers address so far. And I think this characterization as being distinct is just important to bring up. The other caveat or caution that I wanted to sort of bring up to this room is that I think it's also important that we not be viewed as normative or as pushing a particular agenda, because I think that can harm perceptions of the reliability in and the truth in behind the research that we do. And so I'll share sort of a personal anecdote related to how I think about this. So I have a paper that was published in Management Science in 2021 that looked at how employees respond to employers taking stances on social political issues like LGBTQ rights-related issues, for example. And ran a field experiment. I found in this study that employees who disagreed with the stance that was communicated by their employer were demotivated, but I found no such motivating effect if they agreed with the stance that their employer was sharing. And so, you know, I ran this study in 2018. This was one of the earlier papers or studies looking at this topic. And I remember at the time, especially early on when I would present this at conferences, I remember feeling like a lot of people in the CSR community really hated this paper. They really disliked this finding. And people would come up to me after presentations and say, you know, this is one of the earliest papers on the topic. You're saying it's one of the sort of first revealed preference causal papers on the topic. Do you really want to put a paper out there that will cause CEOs to conclude that maybe they shouldn't be opining on issues like LGBTQ rights? And I went back, I like quintuple checked all my analyses. I was like, surely I miscoded a variable. The finding was what the finding was. And you know, looking back on that, I think it was actually perhaps even more important that I published that paper because it found something that I hadn't expected to find, and pre-registered, by the way, and in a lot of ways which sort of went against what I might personally have ideologically been hoping to find there. So, you know, these are just two things I think that are important to keep in mind. Does that mean that I think we shouldn't be doing research on these topics? Absolutely not. But I think that, you know, we have to be careful about how we do it. And, you know, tone, framing, wording in a paper, I think can make all the difference between being perceived as sort of pushing a particular agenda, as opposed to having something important and interesting to say about an important topic.
Thank you for that. I just want to make another anecdote. Andy King is my work on industry self-regulation. Had similar reactions from those who are like, "Oh, you're doubting this thing that we think is going to be the solution here." And I think that idea of we're not, you know, we have to be scientists here is really important. Let me go with Olga, and then we'll get to you.
Yeah, I actually totally agree with Vanessa. As much as I would like for my work to show more positive effects, a lot of it is showing negative effects. But yes, I look at it as this is science and this is what it shows, and this is also important, relevant, and useful to managers to know, right? But in terms of going back to, you know, we're trying to be provocative, Kostas here was talking about how we do generate the relevant insights, but maybe none of them are useful. I would assert this statement that grand challenges absolutely should be in the purview of strategic management, because helping managers think through how to address them would be very useful, right? And not just for managers, but also for society. But I want to go to the last point on this, the bullet, because this kind of came from, again, from teaching, thinking about this hard, and how strategy as a science is truly the only science, I believe, that can actually help managers think through these issues. So think about it. All we're trying to explain, right, is under what conditions X, improves Y. Y is usually firm performance. It's all about heterogeneity. It's all about understanding who wins and why. And so even applying that frame, there are many solutions, but we actually already could predict which of them would have the best answer, because of ecosystems, right? Because maybe of funding, right? Because of those startups, entrepreneurs behind them, their founder identity. We have so much to say that we already actually could predict which of these emerging solutions, and there are a lot, right? Which of them will take off, and which, going back to industry evolution, a lot of people in this room study that, and which of them will fail, and why do they fail? And how can we, how can we address those factors so they don't fail, right? If they have better solutions and incorporating other science. We also look at these trade-offs, right? This is essentially what strategy is all about. So that's why I talk about, sustainability strategy is a strategy course, because as much as, I'd love for it not to be a trade-off, there is still a cost assigned to any of those solutions, right? And so you have to weigh that in against the benefits. And maybe, strategy also looks around. We incorporate institutions, we incorporate countries, right? We incorporate multiple levels of analysis, and that also helps us find more benefits across all of those different levels, which other sciences may not do. They may disregard. Interdependencies, oh my God, talk about that, right? A lot of these grand challenges have a lot of, unintended consequences, as well as, many firms are just not doing anything. And so practitioners want to know, what is the cost of inaction? And what are the potential consequences of these unintended consequences before they make these decisions? And again, I think we have a lot to say. We actually have those answers, we just haven't applied them to these challenges, to the grand challenges yet. Also, strategy is all about setting simple, long-term goals, right? This is kind of the core definition of what it is. And with sustainability, with grand challenges, you have to do that. You have to incorporate those goals into your operations. You have to integrate them functionally inside the organization in order for them to be achieved. You have to, have incentives. And again, we know this, but many people do not. And finally, I want to go back to, the core tenet, I guess, of strategy, right? We also know that resources and capabilities are core to achieving any goals that companies would set, right? And so that also helps, I think, to start, like many nonprofits don't even think about that. I mean, they're under-resourced, they know this, right? But what capabilities do they need to develop? How to develop? Make, buy, borrow, or collaborate, right? Like those decisions, again, we have answers to that that many do not. Thank you.
Thank you. Pete?
I totally agree with everything that's been said. I guess I'm going to tackle this, build on this a little bit from a personal perspective. For the last 2 years, I've been the Vice Dean of the ESG initiative at the Wharton School. So I thought about the strategy of the Wharton School on ESG. And there's some stakeholders of the Wharton School, who you might imagine, alumni, board members, who question whether we should have an ESG strategy. And so I've thought a lot about how to present the case that, yes, we should have a strategy. One piece of evidence that I couldn't point to then, but I can point to now, is we launched a major. In the first year that it was available, it was the 6th most popular major at the Wharton School, and it's on track to be the 4th most popular in the second year. So there's demand. So if we just say, should we be addressing this as a business school? Yes, it's a good strategy. I also face a lot of these critiques of, isn't this just middle managers or CEOs run amok? Don't we just need to control this? Shouldn't we just be focused on business? And I think this is a place where you need to push back and say, look, it's hard to understand the logic that the reason firms are engaging on DEI, the reason firms are engaging on the climate transition, is because of unconstrained middle managers. Relative to maybe extreme heat, extreme storms, racial riots, immigration riots in the UK, maybe businesses are responding to signs that the system is under stress and is fragile on some of these issues. And maybe that's what's really driving corporate responses. And if we're training the managers who are going out and deciding how much to invest in pollution control versus pollution, discrimination in their hiring and pay versus allyship and mentorship and other programs that overcome social injustice in the workforce, sourcing from the lowest cost supplier without regards to human rights or child labor, or responsible sourcing, corporate political activity to drive tax rates down to zero versus anything else, engaging with discourse with stakeholders versus ignoring them, maybe we should be part of that conversation, because these systemic level consequences of business decisions, right? Where does the pollution come from? Where does the discrimination come from? Where does the inequality come from? It comes from the decisions of managers about who to pay, who to hire, who to source from, where to build, how to engage with the government. So businesses are a central actor in these system level challenges that we're facing. There's just no lane in which business operates in which it doesn't affect the grand challenges. So the idea that business should stay in its lane, well, what it makes, who it hires, what it sources from is affecting these outcomes. So there isn't a lane without the grand challenges. And it's also interesting to look at the historical efforts in the past to just focus us in on the control of managerial agency. I mean, we've gone through this period, right? Let's go back and reach Schumpeter and think about the early part of the century, and let's look back at how well the efforts to just focus on managerial pay and incentives went. Did that really create a better functioning capitalist system, or maybe one that was more volatile, had more crises, was more fragile, and now has more populism, and also has more externalities in the forms of grand challenges? I think there's a real logic to be bringing business in. And then why strategic management? And I think this is something that we've all touched on a lot. Addressing this is going to take collective action across sectors. It's going to take addressing ideological differences of opinion about how serious these things are and what are the causal mechanisms behind them. This is certainly a case of Knightian uncertainty. It's going to require massive innovation across ecosystems. This is what we do. There's demand. Business is centrally implicated. And we have exactly the sets of tools and skills in terms of what we study and how we study to make progress on them. So let's go.
Great, thank you all. I'm going to get to the last question here, then hopefully we can have a more kind of wide-ranging discussion here. So our last question was, how can strategic management have more to say about grand challenges? And I want to help frame this by an anecdote. Given the work I do on kind of environmental policy and the like, I get involved at different panels and the like. And I was on one with two other more traditional environmental economists, environmental policy scholars. And when it came to climate change and decarbonization, they only have one answer, and that answer is put a price on carbon. And there have been 30 years of research in economics debating whether a cap and trade system versus a carbon tax is more economically efficient. And it was great. It was a 5-minute conversation with them. And I look at the world as far more complex and interesting than that. You think about R&D policy. You think about now this kind of rise of industrial policy. We're going to talk about that at the next panel here. Antitrust, does that relate to issues here of how we make progress on these issues? Taxation, you can keep going down the list. I think strategy scholars, because of our willingness to maybe relax some of the traditional assumptions, and especially economics, has a unique lens on these issues that other voices out there talking about policy, talking about what actions need to be taken, just simply do not have the mechanisms to really talk about these things. So I highlight a few on here. Obviously our focus on imperfect markets here, the ability to create economic rents, focusing on competitive positioning as a very important and interesting phenomenon to be studied and understood. Competition versus cooperation, the complex dynamics across landscapes, those of us who are interested in interdependency and the like. Obviously, our willingness to even ask the question, could there be other incentives motivating managerial and firm action beyond just the profit motive? That's an interesting and important question here. And then, for those of us interested in innovation and change, just understanding the dynamics of markets, understanding the role that things like search play, endogenous innovation, technology disruptions, market disequilibrium, those are natural to this community of scholars, and dare I say, are not natural to a lot of other allied social sciences. So to turn to the group here, I think the assertion becomes strategy scholars have a unique opportunity actually to address grand challenges, but it might require some shifts in the way we think about who we are and what we do. I had you first last time, right? So I'm going to go with Olga to start this time.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I have to be honest. I was a little disappointed with day one, redefining the DV or units of analysis or levels of analysis or what strategic management is about. And I know some of the more junior faculty in this room also shaking their head in a yes. Because I expected we will be talking about this, social impact, social environmental performance as a new DV that we need to expand as a part of that firm performance. It's not just financial, but it's also all these other types of performance, right, that firms are engaged in and we cannot ignore anymore. So I'd like, I think, to push us to be provocative, to think about that as a DV. Also, I think, we need to think more about even, and I think we already see this in SMS and what's happening. Is Mark Desjardins in the room, by the way? He just got SMS Emerging Scholar Award, and he is now second after Vanessa, after, Ronnie, Mike, and others, John Bundy, who are on that list of, highly selected list of scholars who are contributing to this area of research and are now becoming, again, significant, I think, symbols of the movement. But yes, I think systems level thinking and systems modeling is what we actually have done before. So again, looking at those interdependencies, NK landscape, whatever it is, but you really can model some of these challenges and solutions and different actors using that method. More qualitative studies, of course, always help to dig deeper, and we see a lot of them being published in AMJ, I think. That's another one I will call out. But I want to leave you with some points too, so I'm gonna shut up now.
Let me go to Veet, and then we'll get to you, Vanessa.
I think there's easy low-hanging fruit that we could do, and then I agree. There's harder and there's research that's going to require change. It's going to require advancement. So, some of the easy work, when we're studying strategic implementation and why firms struggle to make some challenges, some choices. Let's study climate mitigation. Let's study social justice issues. Let's bring that into the purview of the strategic change initiatives we're looking at and the implementation. We're looking at rugged landscapes is a great idea. These are complex, interdependent factors. Let's look at that in the way that firms are making the choices. On the social impact question, I think there was a great discussion in the last session yesterday about what should the DV be and what role does firm value play. And I can imagine there being pushback on the DV being social value. But let's keep working through the causal chain. The firm creates negative externalities. All right? Those negative externalities are affecting stakeholders. They're affecting people in the community. They're affecting customers. They're affecting next generations. They're affecting people downstream. They're affecting people who are impacted by the climate crisis. Those people rise up and either protest, demand regulatory change, demand new policies, shift their products of consumption. They demand change. When that happens, it hits firm value. So let's start working through that causal chain. There's not, this is a real problem in the regulatory environment. We talk about social impact or societal materiality in the EU versus financial materiality. They're not orthogonal. They're linked. And we're well placed to look at that linkage. When we're studying collective action and systems and non-market strategy, let's be doing it in this area. So I think there's low-hanging fruit. But would any of this really help us distinguish between a firm that's making profits in tar sands versus green energy, tobacco or palm oil versus sustainable agriculture, online gambling versus financial inclusion, male baldness drugs or versus malaria, dengue, or West Nile, which is now endemic in Texas. Someone who's making profits by avoiding pollution control devices versus producing electric vehicles and sustainable aviation fuel. Where do we start drawing the line between different types of profits and business models which are based on imposing externalities on others versus those that are not doing the same? That's going to require change. change. And these problems go beyond the simple Ostrom models of tragedies of the commons. They go beyond social mobilization or social movement literature. It's going to require more change. And let me just point to a couple changes that are going to be required. There's a lot of exciting work going in stakeholder theory, and we heard about that yesterday. But even the discussion we had yesterday, and a lot of the discussion going on around how we expand stakeholder theory to be more firm-centered, think about who's in and who's out, it's still firm-centered. We're not talking about a system of stakeholders that are choosing which firms to engage with, which firms to engage in conflict with. We're not changing the locus of energy. When we start the conversation of who's in and who's out on an individual firm, we're not looking at a system of heterogeneous stakeholders who vary in their ideology, who are making decisions about which firms to contribute to, which firms not, and how much. And so stakeholder theory needs to expand to more of a system-level perspective. Similarly, non-market strategy. It's great that we're starting, and there's more exciting work around non-market strategy, but are we looking at the industry associations, the PACs that are lobbying against climate change? Are we calling out firms that say one thing in their sustainability efforts and do the opposite in terms of their political lobbying? Are we thinking about non-market strategy as part of the overall corporate strategy, the consistency, the alignment there, and also the industry level and cross-industry partnerships that are often blocking progress on some of these grand challenges? The common theme here is more system-level thinking, more movement away from narrow, solely firm-centered focus, but always bringing it back to firm value in the long term. That's going to require thinking about ecosystems, pragmatic problem solving. The next panel on industrial policy, we're definitely going to need better policies to nudge corporations. I mean, the best way we're going to get ESG investing in corporations to address the climate transition is carbon tax would be first, but the next would be more subsidies, more taxes like the IRA, like the EU policies. So we need those nudges as well to drive change. So we have to be thinking about this at a system level, and I think there's real opportunities to do that.
Just a quick aside here, for those of us who teach non-market strategy, I sometimes feel like it's like Harry Potter and Defense Against the Dark Arts. You can't teach Defense Against the Dark Arts without teaching the dark arts, right? So if you're talking about corporate influence on political institutions and social institutions, that can be used, depending on whatever values you have, for good or for evil. And we just have to recognize that does happen. There's interesting behavior by firms who are actively working against these, and we can ask why they're doing that and what their motivation is. But that's a reality.
And maybe expose them.
All right, Vanessa.
No, I agree. And I think certainly thinking about what we might need to change or see more of, I think it's all of the conversations that we've had in this conference up till now are so related to whether or not we can really sort of make this shift and have more to say about grand challenges. As was mentioned, we would really have to embrace research at all levels of analysis, from the very, very micro to sort of the even more macro, more systems level than we've been thinking about so far. We need to really embrace social outcomes as DVs of interest to our community. I want to emphasize that social outcomes as DVs is much easier said than done, because we would need reliable, accurate measures of what social outcomes are that there's some sort of agreement on as well. And I would argue that doesn't really exist yet. And so that would probably require us to do, related to another one of the past panels, engaging more with policy and practitioners. We would probably, to generate these types of measures and come to agreement about what they are, we would probably have to be engaging more, collaborating more directly with practitioners, with private rating agencies, with natural scientists and individuals in other disciplines. The second thing that I'll emphasize is that I think if we want to really move the needle on grand challenges, one of the things that we have to sort of grapple with is the fact that you can, as you're making progress in one, you can often be doing harm in another. And that is just sort of a trade-off that I think is really hard to tackle. Perhaps in some ways it's an opportunity for us strategy scholars, because we do a lot in terms of sort of thinking about and conceptualizing trade-offs. And then lastly, I just wanted to emphasize that, I think incentives and signals for researchers, especially junior researchers, are really important. And so, is this something that we think that people should just do after they get tenure and become full professors? Or is this something that we really think that junior researchers in strategy should be focusing on as well? And if that's the case, then I would argue that this research we would need to feel really has a place to be published in our top journals, and not just as sort of one special special issue, right? So I would love to hear, as during the audience comments from the different editors in the room, and their take on whether, papers focused on addressing grand challenges would be perceived as a fit in their journal, and what might make a paper focused on the grand challenges to be a fit in one of their top journals.
Thank you all for that. I just want to comment a little bit on the idea of like systems thinking and the systems perspective, which I think we can bring. In full disclosure, I have 2 degrees in systems engineering, and my PhD was technically in MIT's engineering systems division. So this obviously resonates with me. But to put it on a more personal level, as I think about my research trajectory, I think like a lot of people in this space, I started thinking about internalization of negative externalities, typically of large corporate entities, right? So when is a large corporation going to start thinking about these issues and make changes? And a big change for me was when I joined UVA, and I started to think about market transitions and technological disruptions and the like. And it's a different perspective, right? Because then you're talking about a system level, like what causes these types of transitions. To be provocative, when I look at a company like ExxonMobil, I don't expect ExxonMobil to become a renewable energy company. That seems ridiculous to me that you would suggest so. To do my best Dr. Evil impression, what I want ExxonMobil to do is to die. And let's be very honest, and I really, this is important, ExxonMobil's not going to die. They're going to be around for a long time. And by the way, that's a good thing. Our economy is basically based on fossil fuels right now. So if they disappeared tomorrow and all fossil fuels disappeared tomorrow, we'd be in a lot of trouble as a society, unless we can develop these alternatives. So this idea of how do we think of markets and firms as a system? What role do the political institutions and social institutions play in moving these institutions, all of them, towards these solutions to deal with these types of grand challenges? That's really been the motivation for my work more recently. And I would make the argument that the firm is still central and critical to that discussion. And again, I just want to make the plea that I think as scholars, our sophistication in understanding that core agent, the firm, is what gives us an opportunity to have voice in these larger discussions. I am continually shocked and amazed at the simplicity at which political scientists, sociologists, economists think about the firm and how the firm behaves there. So with that, let me open it up to the room, and I'm actually going to do a cold call because we didn't do our assignment and write a paper, but Dan did write a paper and submit it on the platform there. So Dan, I wanted to give you, I know this is truly a cold call, but do you have any thoughts here since you shared something with us here?
So in full disclosure, it was Min Wan,
Okay.
myself, and Tarek Ghani who took the call to submit something. And let me I think a frame.
Yeah, let's get you a mic.
Our framing builds a lot on what Veet started out by saying, that there is a lot of voluntary activity going on here, but it's not nearly enough to meet the magnitude of the challenges. And so maybe I should keep standing. The joke I have is that there are these 2 books, what Harvard Business School teaches you and what Harvard Business School doesn't teach you. And put them together and you know everything that you could possibly need to know. But when it comes to the grand social challenges, our mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive category system is we can address those either through voluntary means or mandatory means and regulation. And when it comes to the voluntary side, what the research that Olga, Vanessa, and others are doing are telling us about what the limits are to what voluntary activity in this sector will be. And we need a lot more of that work. We also need it to be disseminated in a way that Vanessa addresses your critique that we can do well by doing good, but we can't get all the way to the end goal by relying on that mechanism. And so one of our unique capabilities is by articulating what we can do, and to one of Anina's points, not getting captured with false trade-offs, but understanding what the true trade-offs are between some of these social objectives and private objectives are. And then on the mandatory side, to a lot of what you were saying, Mike, policymakers don't understand how firms are going to react to different policy choices. There are lots of examples of unintended consequences of policy, and we can help them understand how firms will interpret, react, game, and address the mandatory regulations that come in to try to address these grand social challenges. So our call was to establish our credibility as people can help policymakers understand the mandatory possibilities, the menu of options, and how they'll be reacted to, get some realistic assumptions about what the market will do on its own so our policymakers aren't crowding out that good, innovative behavior, and continue to kind of push on how we understand the limits of what we'll get through voluntary firm behavior on its own.
Thank you for that. Let's get a couple more comments and then have the panelists respond there. I think Todd's got it.
How wonderful to have this panel, and I'm just so thrilled, and yes, 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 although I disagree, Veet, with your point about firm centricity, and I'll try to make a couple of remarks on that. Sarah, and of course I'm terribly biased, but Sarah has this incredibly great book on the 360 Corporation in which she talks about how for sure we should do well by doing good if we can, but that's low-hanging fruit. I mean, if you're not already doing as well as you can by doing good, then you're not on the frontier. You're not, as a company, you're not maximizing your profit. The really hard thing is to innovate, to do well, to create new value through stakeholder true engagement, taking into account the diversity of stakeholder needs and the fact that many stakeholders don't know what can be accomplished in collaboration with firms. Our paper, this is Leo, and my paper with Tomasz here, two junior scholars who are committed to this agenda, among many others in the room, is about how companies innovate collaboratively with stakeholders to discover and create new value that wasn't previously conceptualized. So doing well by doing good, that phrase, to me, can be co-option of the true opportunity through innovative stakeholder work by the industrial in the industrial mindset that Mike has written about in this great book he did with Rebecca Duff that I want to just mention briefly in a moment. I want to tell you, I have so much to say about this that I need to be careful, so please keep me honest here, Mike, but I want to make 3 quick points. The first is that about 10 years ago, I said to my dean, I can't teach Coke Pepsi anymore. I can't teach my students how to sell more Doritos. I can't do it. I need to, I don't know anything about male pattern baldness or something that you raised here, but I can't, I need to be thinking about the big value creating opportunities of this century, which are the grand challenges, and there are for sure trade-offs among the grand challenges, and we need to get our heads around that, and we need to teach our students to be strategic about that, because as Olga said, there are trade-offs there, and we need to fix that. He said, do it in the core. So he wanted me to teach in the core, and so I said, if I could do that in the core, then I'll teach the core. And so that's what I did here. When I ran for AOM president, I ran on a platform that business schools need to take on the role of grand challenges. And I was for sure certain I was going to lose because it was such an anti-business school platform in that context. And I was shocked when I won. Apparently, people agree with this idea that there's a lot of opportunity there. Complicit in this idea that strategy and that firms can, I believe that business is the engine of prosperity. I believe that it's also the engine of peril. I believe that firms are tools for getting things done. I believe that firms, when they're established, are choices that stakeholder groups make to deploy resources under a particular organizational form. And I'm thrilled to be working with Professor Barney on a new paper in which we explore the evolution of the purpose of the firm as stakeholder groups, either within an organization or not within an organization, choose to try to use corporate forms to get important things done. So there's where I'm a little bit different place than you, Veet, and thrilled to continue that conversation. And then finally, I wanted to just say a word of purpose. I've learned so much from Claudine about this and from all of you here. I see the expression of firm purpose as the firm's theory of impact on grand challenges agenda. And I want to say that these theories can be enormously threatening to established firms. Mike, your book with Rebecca, which I had the honor of reviewing for ASQ, and you know it's a great book. It's called The Decarbonization Imperative. Mike goes through sector by sector and describes how threatening this innovation agenda is to the established firms on a kind of innovator's dilemma kind of framework. I recommend this book to you. This is Asim here? Where is Asim? This is not a dance party, you know? People don't like this. You know, it threatens their profitability. It's a huge threat. And so stakeholderism is really about movements. It's about creating the energy to try to overcome this resistance. So thrilled to be here and to have this conversation with you.
Thank you. Let's take one more, and then we'll go back to the panel here.
All right, great. Thanks, Lamar Pierce, Washington University. So one of the things I love about your conversation here is I think you've sort of dived into this idea of the value at the margin, because I think this big question around, you know, should we take on grand challenges needs to be thought of in a different way, which is around like, where should we be investing our research into around this topic? And let me give you an analogy on this and why this is important. So we know that research on lymphoma and breast cancer are very, very important. But what we also know is we are spending too much on research on those relative to research on breast cancer, or on colorectal cancer, and on lung cancer. And we know what the mortality implications of that are. They're all important to spend money on, just like many, many grand challenges are important to focus on. But where should we be investing the marginal research into these things? And I think in this context, you know, one of my concerns that I've seen is that particularly in China, you have tons of money being pumped in, particularly by the central government, into research on green innovation. And so one thing I'd love your thoughts on are, where are we putting too much research in at the margin relative to others? Because one of my pet peeves is we do very, very few studies on organizations in underrepresented and developing contexts. And I think we tend to do too little of these things because they don't feel like grand challenges. You know, they don't feel like saving the world. But yet then again, if you know, we have a study on organizations that improves efficiency in healthcare clinics in the DRC by 10%, that is a massive benefit. And so I'd love for all of you to discuss sort of where you think we're actually focusing too much on relative to other things and how we might sort of encourage authors to rebalance that.
So I'm going to take that one if it's okay, my moderator prerogative here. I think, Lamar, the question of does it pay to be green or does it pay to be socially responsible? Any younger Scott, like, please don't do that work. It is the wrong question. Andy King and I wrote about this in Management Science in like 2001, and I'm shocked that we're still asking these questions. And lots of us in this room have written papers with titles of that ilk. We're far enough along to know that there is no way we could agree with the idea that there is never an investment that you could make that has social value that does not have profit. But similarly, and equally important, it cannot be the case that every investment a firm makes in social value has positive personal gain or profitable gain to it. And so the framing of the question to me has been wrong for a long time. And I go to the academy and I still see paper after paper that's kind of asking this, you know, is there a private incentive to do X, Y, Z? We need a much more sophisticated understanding of kind of the creation and change of value, share of value, coordination, and the like, kind of the systems perspective we're arguing for here. But let me turn to others here of how they might want to respond to some of these. Vanessa?
Could I add to that? So, to Lamar's question, I think I think it's exciting to think about sort of what our competitive advantage is as sort of a discipline or as even as individual researchers and trying to sort of figure out, where can you have the biggest impact on these types of things. And I think there's innovation scholars that I think it makes sense that they would maybe focus on that aspect of things. And then I think maybe there's a role to play in sort of bringing our understanding of sort of how you organize, motivate, and manage people of heterogeneous preferences and types, just as we do in a firm, to try to sort of bring that learning to these really complex systems and collaborations that we're going to have to be talking about. I'll share sort of a personal anecdote about this. So I'm involved, I'm the corporate engagement director, I'm on the executive committee for NSF Science Technology Center focused on improving climate estimates through AI to try to sort of democratize access to improved climate estimates, essentially. And we had big plans about all the collaborative interdisciplinary research that we were going to do with the engineers and the scientists and myself as a business school person, the social worker on the team. It is much easier to say, let's do cross-disciplinary research than I've discovered it is in practice. I mean, we just use different terms to talk about these things. The way that we think about these things is so different. And one of the things that I've just been so kind of interested to find is I feel like one of the biggest ways that I've had impact on this center has actually been to bring some of the learnings from all of our research on organization culture, management of complex entities, to bear to sort of the governance structure of this entity. And so now actually the NSF has basically asked us to write a paper on our learnings about governance of these complex sort of NSF centers. And so to me, this is just, this highlighted, if I think about what our competitive advantage is as a field, maybe it is about things like our learnings about how to motivate people, how to organize people, things like governance and culture, that's kind of a unique aspect that we could bring to these really complex sort of organizations and issues that we're going to be dealing with.
Yeah, Veet?
Yeah, just really quickly, great questions. So starting with Dan, I think it's important to recognize that when we're thinking about engagement on politically polarized issues, yes, firms may come out behind by engaging, but the world is becoming more polarized, so they may have fewer and fewer choices, and we may be talking about how to minimize losses rather than create victories, and I think that's important. So what's the counterfactual when we're looking at engagement? On crowding out, is voluntary activity crowding out government regulation? I would argue that voluntary efforts to push for more disclosure, to push for more transparency, to get more data is creating the data set that the government is going to look to define good policy. So they're not, again, it's not an orthogonal or a choice. We need more push on corporations to disclose so we can have better policies. And again, I think that's an important shift in the way we're thinking about these two. Anita, I didn't mean to make as much of a conflict between the two different approaches. We need the corporations, we need Sarah's work, we need your work to be looking at all these incredible innovations within the corporations, and then we need to take the next level where there's systems of firms working with NGOs, working with governments, working with their industry association. It's very unlikely that any one firm is going to crack the nut on sustainable aviation fuel, green cement, green steel. There has to be more work at the system level to look at these collaborations, but it starts with individual corporations doing exactly what you're saying. So I think there's much more alignment than maybe my initial comment suggested. And then Lamar, where's the marginal research that should stop? I'm really tired of reviewing papers on Chinese CSR, which is really bribery. If you look at the Chinese accounting standard, it's voluntary contributions to social and political actors who are often affiliated, and so I don't think we're learning a lot about corporate social responsibility and win-wins and anything from studying Chinese firms' disclosure of their voluntary bribes. And then where is there too little work? It's on horizontal, on identity group conflict and the way firms are contributing to populism, resentment against the status quo, identity group conflict, violence. The paper that none of you will go to on 3:30 on Tuesday is showing that as we're pushing climate transition into Africa and we're investing in massive solar plants in Africa, we're contributing to a rise of violence in the communities in which we're putting the solar plants, coming to the trade-offs that Vanessa was talking about. And we need to be thinking more about how multinational firms are contributing to violence, especially among disenfranchised identity groups in emerging markets, but also in inner cities in the United States.
So very quickly, because I want to hear from you all. First of all, I am tired of reviewing papers that use KLD or MSCI data. Just like, don't use it. or like don't even use any existing data, honestly, right? Because like there's so many issues with it. Collect your own, do your own, experiments, especially in under, served, privileged, whatever context, right? We want to see more of that. And the second point, if you want to learn more about climate change and where to start, I'm actually hosting a webinar as part of like SMS Competitive Strategy IG, having 3 junior scholars who will talk about their research and what data they used and how to think about that. So that will be September 6th. The call will come out. But please, let's take more questions.
So let's take 3 more, and then we'll come back to the panel.
This is on?
Yeah.
I just want to prove to you that I know how to use a microphone, that's all. I think we had a great conversation. Subi was saying this is really a great panel, and it's very interesting to hear what you have to say. And I had a little list of things to say, and it's good news. Most of the points were discussed, especially the one on trade-offs, which has been such a problem for those people who do RCTs and who have achieved so little, and even worse with the trade-offs when they're added in as well. So we should be aware of this overall discussion. Olga, I didn't like your comment, because I think it was not you actually speaking. I think it's a frustration of a 7:30 meeting we're going to right now, because this was designed as a progressive meeting, and I think we've maybe come too early in the morning for it, but we've arrived at a point where we can now say, well, what have we said about these issues? And Connie did a great panel designing it, and I talked about social value and gave you some thoughts about it. And there are people here who talked in panel 1 who have got amazing papers on how to think about these issues on it. I mean, a lot of people in this room have done things which are very relevant to what you're talking about. I came through a policy master's degree, et cetera, and I ran programs for ANC and et cetera, Wharton and other people, and continued that throughout my career. But I'm not unique. There are people who do this all around in this group. So I think it was just too harsh on it. But I think now is the moment maybe to say, well, okay, we heard the passion, so what is the actual reality? And I'm beginning to hear that reality and what the whole thing is. So what I've learned about this area is kind of this part of Simon which is not discussed too often, and that really is that there is a design thinking which goes along with professional schools. So they're often on design issues. And so how do you design a program, which is what Veet is talking about, which is effective on it? And grand challenges doesn't mean much to me, to be honest with you, because I don't, for the reasons you've already said on it. And I think there's some problems also with just having, for example, classes on social value. And the reasons why that's really a problem. Because when you look at these programs, and forgive me for this, to say something so controversial on it, is that it's highly gendered. It's in terms of the overall ratio of women and men in the school, the ones who are in social, and it pays a lot less in the future. So if that's something we care about, we should make sure that this teaching, this knowledge, is throughout the whole school and involves thinking very closely with issues of finance and how to make profit, et cetera, and so on it. I wanted to raise, when you think about an example, when you think about doing an executive program, so we've been asked, so funny, I hate to admit this to my Wharton colleagues, but I often go back to we Wharton, but I'm not sure they'll admit me back into the club anyhow. But, still love me. But we did have a chance to have people come in from the outside and run programs. But we're expensive. In fact, we're all very expensive. In fact, we have to ask ourselves the question, are we putting our time, given how much society pays us, to the activities which really need us the most, given our training on it? And I think we probably very often make misallocations on it. So when you do a program, like for example, for black entrepreneurs in Africa, financed by the AID of the US government, you say, well, why am I paying, my Wharton colleagues and myself this much money when I can do a collaboration with some other school which pays their faculty less? It may sound weird, and they can deliver a lot of things which we have priced ourselves out of, and we may have priced ourselves out on many things by now, but teaching basic accounting, et cetera, can be done by lots of people. Then you get to tell what you actually want to teach people in the room. And they also can teach you back, which is an incredible part of this area. And they come back to you and they say, well, competition, et cetera, and so on. Well, my experience is amongst social enterprises, they're often competing with each other. So all the things we're saying about strategy and strategies in a world of social value creation still exists. And many people don't achieve what they want. And part of the edge of that is that when BYD, build your own dream, says, I'm going to put a $1 billion plant into Turkey, that's private enterprise building the plant, just like Elon Musk did that. Private money for-profit intentions, building things which was not created by the social sector, and can't be done very well. So this all has to be discussed in the context of this room and the various parts which were approached. But now is the time to stop being passionate about this discussion and get real about it and talk about these trade-offs, which are so important, and the other things we raised, and have a serious discussion, including the quality of the research which is done by this community compared by a policy school. I'll give you the name of someone. Look at Scott Barrett's work over in Columbia on his, what we call stakeholder strategies, to what's been published in SMJ and elsewhere.
So I wanted to raise two, I think, challenges for the field. Very, very important panel, by the way. I really enjoyed all of the comments from the discussant, from the panelists. So two challenges, I think, that are actually quite poignant in this particular area when thinking about grand challenges. The first is, I think there's a mismatch between potential impact and incentives in the field. Because, as a number of you articulated, I think Mike most directly, we have things to contribute. They need to be part of a larger conversation. So if all we do is address these questions in the SMJ, then we're really missing a huge opportunity to have a broader impact. But at the same time, as we're all aware, the incentives is to publish in the field. And especially for junior scholars, I think we have to think more innovatively about how we make the potential impact match with the incentive systems that academics have. The second challenge that I'm also concerned about is the role of ideology. Bruce brought this up on the first day. Yesterday we were having a discussion with Dan, where he is, about who's joining the field. And one of the big motivations for a lot of people to do a PhD, especially in strategy, including in strategy, is the desire to have impact on big issues that are affecting society more broadly, that involve firms, but that have a broader impact. And of course, that ideology, that passion is a wonderful thing, right? We've discussed about how lots of good research coming out of it, addressing important big issues that are outstanding there. But at the same time, the ideology can also affect the types of research questions people take on, what types of results are acceptable, celebrated. There's both an individual level, sort of dynamic here, but also a group dynamic or a collective dynamic. And I wonder if you have any thoughts or whether you could address maybe in your article, how do we deal with both of these challenges?
Laurence Capron from INSEAD, just a couple of observations. On the question about whether it should be grand challenges should be part of strategic management, I think we don't have the choice. I think if we want to remain relevant, it's a demand-side argument, but if I reflect on my experience at INSEAD with executive education programs, in our flagship programs with board members and senior executives, they ask for that content. They ask for sustainability content. They push back in the feedback form, we want more. They also want to know about their own career risk. They want to reflect, for example, on what happened at Danone with Emmanuel Faber, for instance. For board members, they want to understand how they can structure the design and incentive system of their CEO to include social outcome and not just efficient output. And the other observation is on the research side, and I think I would like to build on the Vanessa comment as well. I think yesterday we have a very interesting panel with Miles, Mary, and Raoul on the unit of analysis and whether ultimately we should do an explicit connection with value creation and value capture. And I think Vit, you also mentioned activity level system and coalition and ecosystem. So I think that we need to continue to try to build a consensus on that, on the DV, because as potential writers, but also as reviewers, we need guidance from the editors, how to assess a paper that look at these grand challenges, and ultimately the link with the DV on value creation. Should we be firm-centric, or should we change the focus, and so that we don't put our field too much in a straitjacket?
Let's take one more, and then we'll get responses here from the panel. I think somebody already has the mic.
Oh, sure. So I don't know if this is worthy of the last comment before we go back to comments, but just one thought around another opportunity for the field in this area that hasn't come up that I just wanted to interject into the conversation, which is the role of capital and ownership. So in a lot of this discussion, we've sort of assumed that firms are sort of the traditional idealized Burlean means corporations where they're sort of doing their stylized things, but thinking really seriously about the role of ownership, capital, and how those owners are directing firms and what their priorities are, I think is a very important piece of this puzzle that I think we've largely ceded to corporate finance. So there's really cool studies coming out of the finance departments on this, but they're really strategy studies, I think. And so taking very seriously comparative ownership to assume what the objective functions of different types of capital providers are and how those objectives can steer companies is something that I think should be well within the purview of our field. For me, that's, I've looked at purpose for the last 10 years. Purpose is really co-determined with who the owners are. And ownership is fundamentally shifting from where it was 20, 30 years ago. And so I wanted to interject that. And just one last piece of this, some of the most interesting discussions that I've had about purpose have been with law school professors. So both finance, but also law school. So the legal side of the world is thinking very deeply around the corporate form and what corporations can do and what purpose means and what personhood means. And so thinking about bringing in some of those ideas into our field and doing research on what does that mean for how companies act in this area, I think is an important part of the puzzle.
All right, let me turn to the panel and recognize we have 3.5 minutes. So you've got 1 minute, Olga, and then we'll get...
I need to first apologize because I was outside on our recruiting call for that one panel on the DV, so sorry, Connie. It was a socially constructed view. But I think I guess in 1 minute, what I can mention, what else we should be doing is just embracing these ideas, just being open to them, because I agree, Deepak, as he was saying, we see more and more PhD students that only want to work with like 1 or 2 faculty that are working on these issues. And if we all opened up, our horizons, I guess, to working on these grand challenges, we would learn ourselves. I learned a lot from my first PhD student, and we will expand the field and make it more relevant.
Vit?
So I'll try to link responses because of the minute. But I think it's really important that we're not training just corporate sustainability officers or thinking just about strategic management. This is a corporate problem. And so it's affecting the boards of directors. It's affecting the CEOs. It's affecting cross-functional coordination. The major we're offering is training people who are going into private equity, is training people who are going into consulting. It's not just training people who are going to be ESG specialists. I think that's really important. That does draw in the questions of ownership, corporate finance, law, others. What is the DV? I think it's really important to stay within strategic management on value creation, but think about how social value affects value creation. So kind of consistent with what Miles said. Ideology driving results. The largest ever cited paper that shows a win-win has been discredited by Andy King, and that's a real problem. So yes, we have to get beyond passion and just hoping that the results and the correlations are positive to better data and better results, and that's really critical.
Thank you. Vanessa?
I'll just say that I think, I'm really grateful to this conference because I think we have to have had all of these discussions and have a sense of where the agreements are and the disagreements are to get to kind of the important next part of sort of, okay, well, this is lovely. What do we do now? And my guess is that there will be furtherings of these conversations, but I mean, I'm hearing that I think there's a lot of sort of implications for teaching, best practices of teaching, as well as for sort of the research side, maybe, some set of kind of guidelines or guidance that we want to provide researchers that are interested in this area, as well as the important point of sort of guidelines for reviewers and editors as well. So, I'm excited to see what this all looks like in the future.
I just want to end, maybe be provocative, and take on this point about ideology. So people are coming in to get their PhDs, and they have passions and interests. I hope everybody who got into their PhD program had passions and interests. Our students are coming in with passion and interests. In addition to the work that I do on sustainability, I do work on technology, digital technology, AI. No one ever says that work is ideological. It's an ideological work you're doing there. So why is it that when I look at, electric vehicles, that's ideological, but when I look at, AI adoption, that's an interesting, area of study there. And I agree with the notion that if your passion and interest, not ideology, drive the way in which you do your results or it leads to bad research, well, that's bad. We could all agree upon that. But this idea that the very choice to look at interesting questions makes you an ideologue, I just don't understand that premise. And I find that just infuriating that is kind of thrown out over and over again to those of us interested in these areas that, you're obviously an ideologue or you have an ideological bent here. No, I am a interesting person who has interests and passions, and I've chosen to look at a set of questions here. In the same way, if you're really interested in total quality management, awesome, do that work. If you're interested in AI, great. HR, whatever it might be. But it's not ideology. It's just passion and interest.
I just want to add on that. The idea that libertarians are criticizing investors and firms for getting involved in ESG, and their answer is to regulate that out of existence, suggests the ideology is a little inconsistent. So let's call that out for what it is.
Thank you to this panel. We wanted to end this conference on a crescendo. We were not slotting this in the worst slot. And of course, as an editor, we are massively interested in this topic at our journals. I think I probably speak for other strategy journals as well, but we certainly speak about it in terms of strategy science. We're going to take a 15-minute break and be back, okay?